Today we're going to disassemble and reassemble a PLR-16 223 pistol made by Kel-Tec. The first thing we need to do is make absolutely sure that the chamber is empty. Pull back on the bolt and take a look. If you need to, use your finger, something, poke around in there to verify it absolutely is empty. Very important. Next thing is push out the assembly pin. You can use a 223 cartridge, but I'm going to use this 22 caliber cleaning brush and just use the 832 threaded end and push it right out. It comes right out the back. Very simple. And then with that done, the pistol grip pivots down out of the way. Now we need to remove the bolt carrier and gas tube as one assembly. To do that, grab the gas tube, pinch it, pull outward, and then rotate 90 degrees counterclockwise. And that allows the entire assembly to go back into the receiver. Pull down the operating handle pulls out. And then just tip it down, and the bolt carrier and gas tube assemblies come out all as one piece. Now to disassemble the bolt group, first thing we're going to do is press out this pin. There's a firing pin that's pressed out. I just use the back pin on the operating handle, pushes out and comes right out the bottom. And with that done, the firing pin can come right out the back of the bolt. With the firing pin out, the cam pin comes out the top of the bolt, and then the bolt comes out the front of the bolt carrier. So those are the four major parts to the bolt group. Now to disassemble the gas tube, it's kind of a three-handed operation, so I'm going to put the back of the bolt carrier on the firm object, push in with my finger onto the piston head, and then be very careful because these are all under spring tension. You don't want parts to go flying. Use the firing pin to push out that pin, and then let off the spring tension, pull out the spring, pull off the gas tube, and there's that. Now let's go through all the parts kind of by the order we took them apart. The manual's very good. There's a good diagram in the manual that explains what all the parts are, and there's a parts list next to it. There's also good procedures in there for disassembly, reassembly. Follow the manual. This video should be considered to be a supplement to the manual. So the assembly pin is part number 158. The operating handle is part 122. The firing pin is part number 134. The firing pin is part number 118. The cam pin is part 126. And the bolt is part 110. The piston pin is part 296. The piston head is part number 130. The piston recoil spring is part 575. The piston recoil spring tube, which I've been calling the gas tube, is part 533. And on the back of that is part 128, the recoil spring catch, and has that little tab on top that locks into the receiver. It's also used visually to align these parts. The back of this is the bolt carrier. That's part number 120. And the front of this is the piston rod, which is part 524. So let's talk a little bit about cleaning. I'll wipe all these down with a light coating of rim oil. I use rim oil. You can use any good gun oil you like. I pay particular attention to the front of the piston. It gets a lot of carbon on there. That's where the gas impinges. I'll use a brush and a little solvent to clean that up. Back over on the bolt, I'll make sure the bolt face is nice and clean. I'll clean underneath the extractor claw, make sure the extractor claw is not chipped and there's no debris under there. I'll clean around the ejector pin, and then back on the pivot for the extractor I'll put a little drop of oil right in there, and that allows that to work properly. Moving into the receiver area, I'll clean the top of the hammer and put a little bit of grease on there, make sure there's no burrs or anything, and I'll use a lint-free swab with a little bit of gun oil just on the top of the trigger assembly, more or less just to get any little carbon debris that might be in there, something to swab that up, and put a little fine coat of lubricant. You don't need much in there. And then I'll take a 12-gauge patch, put a little gun oil on it, and wipe up inside the receiver, well up into here. I'll wipe up into the mag well, and there'll be just a little bit of carbon in there, not too much, because unlike an AR, which has a direct impingement system and puts gas back into the bolt group, the PLR has this gas tube up on top where all the dirty stuff stays, so it keeps the bolt group pretty clean. I'll clean around the locking lugs with, not with the firing pin, I'm just pointing with that, but I'll have a curved pick I'll use to reach in there and clean around. And you can also put a brush in there and clean that. A fine bristle brush. I'll clean the bore. I'll take a cable push it through and pull a patch wrapped around a brush. I'll use mildly abrasive bore cleaner, but you can use solvent, whatever you prefer, and I always go from chamber to muzzle. That protects the muzzle crown. It's just a general policy I have. Every few hundred rounds I'll unscrew this, and the foregrip goes forward and separates, and that allows me to get access to the barrel. There'll be a little carbon on the barrel that comes from the gas block venting down on there, so I'll clean that out. Okay, now let's move on to reassembly, which is essentially the reverse of disassembly. So I'll take the bolt and locate the extractor. That's this part, and then that goes down in this picture, in this image. That'll be to the right. The extractor will be to the right of the PLR, where the ejection port is. So with that done, the bolt goes back into the bolt carrier. And you can look down inside the bolt carrier into the bolt and see the hole where the cam pin will go. So just drop the cam pin down into that hole. You might need to wiggle the bolt around a little bit to make them align. And now, it's important that that cam pin stays in the downward direction, because the next thing we're going to do is put in the firing pin. The firing pin goes through the cam pin. So if the cam pin is up, it'll go underneath it. You don't want that. So just slide the firing pin in the back. On the top of the firing pin, there's a little notch, and that notch will be right underneath the firing pin. That's where it locates and retains it. So you can push it back through, and you can actually see it as it goes through the hole. You can see the notch go by, and once the notch is in place, you'll have about 1/10 of an inch of firing pin sticking out the back of the bolt carrier. At that point, you should be able to just drop the firing pin in place, and it'll just drop right in there. And the firing pin secures the firing pin secures the cam pin, and the cam pin secures the bolt. So everything operates nice and smoothly. As you can see, there's no friction in that system to speak of. It should operate very, very smoothly. Moving on to the gas system, put on the tube, put on the recoil spring, put on the bolt, the piston head, and the hex part of the piston head goes in. Don't put the round part in. That's kind of the intuitive way to do it, but the right way to do it is put the hex head in and the round part out. And then I'm going to put the back of the bolt carrier against a firm surface, because this is kind of a three-handed job, and there's a little bit of alignment that needs to occur up here for this pin to drop in, so it's a little tricky, but compress it, being careful not to let parts fly out all over the place. And then when you get it lined up just right, you can visually see those parts aligning in there. And once they're aligned, you should be able to push that pin right in. And with the pin in place, there we go. With the pin in place, see that the recoil spring's operating properly. There's nothing jammed or working. And don't overextend it and damage it, by the way. Just a little bit's all you need. Now we're ready to put the bolt carrier, the bolt group and the gas tube group back into the receiver. The trick here is this bolt needs to be out. If the bolt is in, this cam pin sticks out and will interfere with the receiver and won't allow it to assemble properly. So at all times, that bolt should be out and making the cam pin go in. So I hold that out with my finger. And then I also tip the PLR receiver downward as I'm putting it together, and that helps it stay in the right direction, keep the bolt out. And if you do it properly, it should just snap right up into place. And again, making absolutely sure that bolt is out at all times. In reassembly, having the bolt go back up into the bolt carrier is the biggest mistake, the biggest problem area. With that happening, the operating handle should drop right in, push up and forward, and then pinch the gas tube, pull outward, and rotate it 90 degrees clockwise. That's looking down in from the muzzle side. So 90 degrees clockwise. A little too much gun oil in my hands. There we go. And that locks the gas tube into the receiver so that now the recoil spring is operating. Pivot up the pistol grip, push in the assembly pin, and it all just goes right back together. Verify it's working. That's all there is to it. Hope it was useful, helpful, and I'll see you on the range.